Experience. If I could speak, I would have got that right. We are live. Today is Sunday, October 9th, 2016. Wow, I'm getting a weird echo out there. I'm Matt Dillahunty, your host. Joining me this week, John Iacoletti. Yay!
Hey.
And there's a crowd on the other side of the glass that's it's almost bigger than the back cruise. So.
Yeah, we have an awesome audience today. We have people from Fort Worth and from Delaware and from Sweden and from Las Vegas and
somebody who's not quite from China, but they said he was from China, and LA, and I don't know where else. But yeah, we our back cruise was recently. I don't know if they spoke about that last week. I don't know that we need to do a revamp, but there's definitely more people out there than there were bats on this year's back cruise.
yeah,
It was a weird overcast night, and it just didn't quite work out. Which is, people were like, "Oh, how often have you not had bats?" Never.
first time.
This is it. And how often have you been rained out? Never. I mean, and although it didn't rain, it was definitely kind of ugly.
The bats this year just have plenty to eat because we got so much rain earlier in the year, and they don't even have to go out and work for it. So
Yeah, just take a night off.
yeah.
So this is a live television program sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin. You can find out more about the ACA at atheist-community.org. And the website for this program is atheist-experience.com. And that's where you can find out how to call the show, including the telephone number. And there's a link, which was green, although when I went to the page, it didn't look green today. But it's down there in the Contact the Show segment section so that you can, if you have some sort of voice over IP or headphone microphone set up and you want to call in that way, you can do that as well. We've got 6 lines. They're all full. So if you're just now hearing about how to contact the show, well, maybe you can try next week. I wanted to actually look at the calendar because you mentioned that we're going somewhere else for dinner. After this show's over, we get together and for dinner at Star of India, and they'll have there it is, right there, 2900 West Anderson Lane. But next week on the 16th, we're going somewhere else, and we have a special guest.
Yeah, we have Ed Brayton's coming in to do a lecture, and he's going to be on the show next week. And because he wanted Texas barbecue, he asked if we could move it. So next week only, we're going to Style Switch Barbecue. It's on North Lamar. I don't have the address off the top of my head, but it's look on the website, and the information's there.
And Ed's actually staying with me and Beth, and so I don't know how good Styles is. So I will probably take him to Salt Lick and Black's, and then he will be stuffed with barbecue when we send him off after this. I don't think that we have any other major ACA announcements outside of next week. For me, I just got back from California. I had a great discussion with a mathematician who's also a Christian. There was a pastor invited me out. The video of that's up for patrons right now, but it'll be live to the world tomorrow, and so everybody can take a look at that. And the one reason I'm encouraging it is because it's going to be different from many of the other conversations and debates that you've seen me do, including the one I did the previous Sunday with Matt Slick, which is also up. I've got a few other things on my schedule, including I'm heading up to Mythicist Milwaukee's convention on the 20th to moderate a debate between Bart Ehrman and Robert Price about whether or not Jesus existed. And it's weird because Bart Ehrman's position is that Jesus existed as a historical figure, but he also holds the position that Jesus never claimed to be divine, which is something that I don't agree with. But Bob Price's view is that Jesus wasn't a real historical figure, but the non-real historical figure, the character, did claim to be divine. We've had those discussions before. It'll be an interesting debate. And then I'm in Kansas for Skeptics of Oz, and then in Vancouver on November 6th with Dawkins, and then in Dallas. And people will say, where can I go to find your schedule? I'm too lazy and unprofessional to actually have an easy answer to that. So just follow on Facebook, and I try to post where I'm going to be with some regularity. The good news is that while I'm gone, there are some awesome people who host the show, so those of you who don't like it when I'm on the show can tune in and watch all these other wonderful folks. And John's just smiling and staying quiet. It's like, but we got a bunch of callers, and I want to make sure we get to them. We'll try and see how many we can actually get to today, thanks to the studio audience and thanks to the guys in the booth who continue to make technological improvements to the show. Every week I show up, and something here is improved. There's a new TV, there's new monitors, we've adjusted audio levels, we've tweaked the streaming stuff. Hopefully, most of you who had emailed previously with complaints or concerns about the technical quality of the show are finally getting to see what can happen after you patiently wait for some experts to come in and help fix things up. But on that note, we'll start with Vane in Atlanta, Georgia. Are you there? Oh, can't hardly hear you. Can you hear him, John?
I cannot.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, but it's really quiet.
Just after you said how we were fixing our technical problems.
Yeah. I'm going to put you on hold and see if we're having the same problem with other lines as well. Kevin in Albuquerque, are you there?
Hi, Matt.
Yeah, it's the same problem across the board. So basically, it almost sounds like everybody is muted. Not sure if something's changed on the board or been sent out, but I'm going to put you back on hold, and I'll wait for them to let me know that this has been fixed or tweaked, and hopefully we don't have to sit here for an hour and a half and talk about nothing.
Yeah.
How's your day, John?
My day's okay.
So I will say, this isn't, obviously this wasn't planned because I wanted to get to callers really quickly, but I'll talk a little bit about the debate with Matt Slick for a few minutes. Yes, for those people who pay attention to my Patreon project, there will be a full debate review coming. But we had gone back and forth on what the topic was going to be. What's the topic of this debate? And Matt was seemingly desperate to make sure that I was on defense because I'm just too damn slippery. And if he was on defense, all I would have to do is sit there and, deny everything or something along those lines. I don't know. So he wanted me on defense, and he tried to get me to defend philosophical naturalism in some form, despite the fact that I've repeatedly pointed out that's not my position, and it's not my position to defend. To the extent that I'm a naturalist, it's methodological naturalism. And the difference between those two, now I got some static. The difference between those two is that philosophical naturalism is sort of the position of claiming the natural world is all there is. Methodological naturalism is more like saying the natural world is all that we have access to, and it's not a claim that the supernatural isn't real. It's a claim that we don't have any way to investigate or confirm the supernatural. So until that changes, we don't get to appeal to it. One of them is roughly the equivalent of saying, I am not convinced of the supernatural, and the other one is claiming, I'm convinced the supernatural is not real. And he wanted me to defend positions that I don't hold or advocate. He submitted a number of topics that were not true dichotomies, not good questions, which is better, Christianity or naturalism? I don't know. But I decided that I'm a skeptic and a secular humanist, and those are the two things that are most important. The atheism is a product of applying my skepticism to the world and not finding good reasons to believe in a God. Those are the foundations that I rest on, and I want to talk more about secular humanism. So I suggested the topic, is secular humanism superior to Christianity? And I got up and gave my opening statement, which was an explanation about the goals, methods, and results that we can expect and have seen from the application of secular humanist principles, in contrast with what we've seen from various versions of Christianity, and why secular humanism is superior. When Matt Slick got up to give his opening statement, he began with going to the secular humanist page, seeing the words philosophical naturalism, and then explaining everything that he thought was wrong with philosophical naturalism, asserting that secular humanism was self-refuting because it cannot explain the logical absolutes. You knew that was coming if you knew anything about Matt Slick, and then spending most of the time on that. I'll be doing a debate review where we go through kind of the details of what happened. But one of us showed up to debate that topic, and one of us showed up to provide the same old shtick as always. And I think that's obvious in the debate. The problem here is that the Q&A period is so long and so frustrating and so largely irrelevant to the topic at hand that I think most people just gave up before. If you did that, just fast forward to the closing remarks where I try to bring everything back around home, or just tune into the debate review later. We think we've got the situation fixed. Vane in Atlanta, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, we can hear you now.
That's better.
Okay. Since I have a limited time to speak, just let me know when I could tell my exit joke before you hang up on me, okay?
Okay, you can tell it now.
Give me an entry joke.
All right, so that was my joke. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, I kind of get it from watching many episodes of the show that not only do the host and co-host believe that Christianity is unfounded, but that it also does some hurtful things.
Sure.
And I was thinking, after watching you speak on June 12th, if religion is not to blame for the cause of homophobia, how can you blame them for anything else?
So your question is, if religion isn't responsible for homophobia, how could we blame it for anything else?
Yes.
Okay. If my car isn't responsible for your diabetes, could you still blame my car for something else?
Oh, well, my point with that is I thought religion would be the easiest thing to prove responsible for homophobia. I thought that'd be a very easy thing to go ahead and jump on religion and point the finger at religion for being the cause of homophobia. And if you can't jump on religion for that, well, what can you jump on them for?
I can jump on any religion for anything that it claims which is problematic or contrary to human values and flourishing. Is religion responsible for homophobia? Probably not.
It certainly perpetuates it, though, and reinforces it, and in many ways.
So what a lot of religions tend to do is take the biases, bigotry, and fears in life and provide some justification for them. So if you are the type of person who is absolutely terrified of the gays, and your religion gives you a justification that, hey, God says they're terrible too, well, now you feel warranted rather than just feeling like the bigot that you are.
Okay. I guess we should just try to move on to save time. I would like to ask, why do you coach Christians different from atheists when it comes down to trying to prove their point? I see a lot of times you give both of them advice, and you usually tell the Christians, well, what's your best evidence? But when it comes down to the atheists, you go and tell them, oh, hey, you're not going to change someone's mind in just one conversation. What you do is, little by little, you change their mind. And then they get things from many different sources. But with the Christians, you just tell them, come outright and give their best evidence. Why do you give them different advice?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm harder on atheists than I am on Christians, whether you believe that or not, because the one thing I despise is bad arguments, but I despise them most when they're offered to defend positions that I hold. And so when I see atheists making fallacious arguments, I go at them to the point where, well, it's cost me quite a few friendships because I won't tolerate that. But when we're talking about, you seem to be saying, oh, for Christians you ask for evidence, and for atheists you talk about the art of persuasion.
No.
That's not what you were saying?
When it comes to Christians, you want them to just have one big proof of evidence, while with atheists, you say, no, there is no magic bullet. There is no one good argument to make a person give up their Christian beliefs, that you have to work with them over time.
So what I said about asking Christians for evidence, their best evidence, and talking to atheists about what is persuasive is what you're talking about.
Yeah, that you ask Christians to go on one shot and you tell atheists to go slowly over time.
Yeah. So when I ask somebody for their best argument for a proposition and their best argument sucks, what makes you think it's going to get any better with the worse arguments?
This is where I have the analogy where for how you prove that someone loves you, because you can never do that in one argument. You have to pull forth many different things over time.
Sure, but if your first best evidence for that someone loves you is that they beat you, you've already lost.
No, okay, you're bringing forth a negative which can't be argued at all. Let's say you bring forth a great positive.
Thank you.
No,
the reason this is different is because atheists are not claiming there is no God and we can prove it. Atheists are saying you have not met your burden of proof that there is a God. So atheists don't have a position for which to bring forth evidence other than to respond to the God claims and point out why they haven't met their burden of proof. Now, when I ask somebody to present their best argument, that's in the context of the show because we'd like to move on to multiple callers. But I don't think it's fair for you to imply that I'm only interested in a one-shot single argument when I've been hosting a TV show for 12 years, taking hundreds, if not thousands, of calls from all different people who could each present their own evidence, and all of them fail?
It fails because you're trying to analyze one piece of evidence at a time, which, like I was saying, when you're trying to prove love, you can't just analyze one piece of evidence. Okay, you have kids with this person. That one piece of evidence could be thrown out the window. You say, oh, having kids with them does not prove that y'all love each other.
Correct. Having
it'd be the
kids
same
together
thing with
doesn't prove you
theism.
love each other.
That one piece of evidence, as long as they present you one at a time, you could go ahead and shoot it down.
Yes.
But with an amalgamation over time, then
No.
a person could be swayed.
No, if each one of those is a no, they don't add up to a yes if I just let them list 10 of them. 10 no's does not equal a yes. Why do you believe in a God? I'll give you two options. You get double what everybody else gets. Why do you believe God exists?
I don't know if you remember me, but yeah, like I was saying, that's not something I would like to try to argue for, to try to get other people to
Okay,
believe.
then I'll move on to another caller. Thanks, Fane. So this is an interactive show where we talk about what people believe and why they believe it. And if you're going to call in and you're going to say, I don't really want to defend what I believe, and you're going to, but why do you expect us to offer an argument? Why do we expect them to offer an argument, John?
Well, because this is a show about talking to people about what they believe and why they believe it, and to have a dialogue. And so if they call in and say, I believe in God, why don't you? Then we want to know why.
The other thing is, I'm baffled at the people who believe and are convinced that they believe, who simultaneously claim that they care about whether or not their beliefs are true. Because if I believe something and I'm convinced that it's true, I can either explain to you why I'm convinced that something happens to be the case, or I can point you to someone else who might be able to explain it better than me. By the way, I'm not just saying, oh, I'm going to point you to some scientist, because if I don't understand it, I don't believe it by definition. There are plenty of scientific findings that I have expert friends in those fields, and they are convinced that something is true. I'm not convinced because I don't understand it well enough to do it. I have this idea that it's a good idea for my internal model of the universe to match reality as best I can. And so when I tell somebody, give me your best argument, that is because if I don't say that, I don't get an argument. What I get is, well, you know, you can't just prove that somebody loves you with just a single instance. That's the type of thing that we get. Oh, look at the trees. That's the type of thing that we get if we don't. Let me just narrow it down. Give me your best one. Because if you've got 10 reasons to believe and your best one is crap, I might let you move on to your second best one. And if it's crap, then maybe we could go on to your third one. Where do we stop?
Well, like you said, we're at an hour and a half show, and if somebody wants to talk about the 30 reasons they believe in God, we're going to fill up the entire show, and we want to move on. So we ask for your best one so we can dig into that. And yeah, if that's not persuasive.
If you're a caller to this show, and what you've seen is people who share your beliefs calling in, being asked to present their best argument, and every single one of them is flawed, then what you're really saying is they didn't actually present the best argument. And so my response to you is, give me your best. But if you come on and present as your best the same terrible argument that we've already refuted, what do you think that's going to accomplish? I mean, if instead of presenting an argument, you'd like to have a discussion about what would or should convince people of a claim, we can do that. We've got Kevin in Albuquerque. Thanks for waiting.
Hi, Matt. Kevin from Albuquerque.
Hi, John.
Hi, John.
Hi, Kevin. That's my hometown.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Well, good. So I wanted to call in and basically express some gratitude and let you know that you did me personally a lot of good when I was recovering from alcohol as an alcoholic. And I was going to AA and had a lot of people trying to convince me that I was never going to get sober if I didn't have a higher power. Mm-hmm. And managed to internalize that, and it was causing a whole lot of stress and really not helpful. And finally, out of desperation, I started Googling atheism and came across your show. And I watched, I think, most of your back catalog. And it was really helpful. It made me feel like there was actually nothing wrong with me as far as my beliefs went. So that was really helpful. And eventually I found Smart Recovery,
Right.
which is a secular CBT-based program. And that's been really helpful. And from what I've seen, it's at least as effective as 12-step programs.
Well, it's hard to say whether or not it's as effective because 12-step programs do everything in their power to hide and lie about and distort their recidivism rates so that you can't tell how effective it is. Basically, if you're in a 12-step program and you're still sober, then the program's working. And as soon as you fall off, then you're not in the 12-step program anymore, and it was your fault, not the program's. So I'm glad that you found a secular system. By the way, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, science-based psychology that is results-based. Now, how effective it is a subject of disagreement and what areas it's effective in. But as much as I despise 12-step programs for replacing one addiction with another and pointing to people as helpless and making them identify a higher power even if they have to invent one, rather than actually focusing on the real psychology and helping people beat addictions or at least begin to live their lives without being trapped by the addiction. If somebody goes in a 12-step program and stops abusing the substance that they were abusing previously, I'm very happy for them. I'm glad that there was a positive result. I'd be happier if there was a positive result for what I think are good reasons based on, good science.
Right. But one thing I've seen being around those rooms is when somebody focuses their entire recovery on the existence of a non-existent higher power, that's kind of a house of cards, and it's pretty easy to collapse if they step outside of that echo chamber. So,
yes, and it doesn't just apply. It doesn't just apply to sobriety. If your moral values are entirely based on a fictional foundation, when that foundation goes away, how moral are you likely to be? And what state are you going to be? Are you going to have to rethink everything with respect to morality, which is why I argued for secular humanism over any religious view.
Right. Anyhow, I just wanted to let you know that you personally did me a lot of good, even if it wasn't convincing a theist to give up their beliefs.
Well, thank you.
At least you found that, and also the nonprofit show that you guys do. And the other thing that you guys do, which a lot of atheist podcasts don't do, is I haven't. You guys don't drink or talk about drinking a lot when you're on the air or doing the podcast. And
see, now you're going to make me self-conscious about whether or not I mentioned drinking.
No, that's fine. You do great. But a lot of the atheist podcasts are really focused on drinking. I mean, some of them are literally drinking games.
Yes.
And so those in early recovery, that's kind of hard to listen to. But you guys were easy, and it was great. So thanks a lot, and I'll let you get to some other callers.
Thanks, Kevin. And congratulations on recovering from your addiction and living a healthier, happier life.
Yeah, for sure. That's nice to hear, Kevin. I have some experience with 12-step, not with substance abuse, but with codependency. Mm-hmm. And I echo all the things you said about it, replacing one addiction with another and kind of attributing the responsibility for your recovery on this higher power rather than your own actions is I don't understand that approach. I think what was more helpful was just having that group of people, that support group of people that you saw and you could count on, and they supported you and they encouraged you. And I think the higher power stuff was window dressing.
Yeah, imagine that. One system tells you you are powerless and then gives you a community of people who also think that they're powerless. And the other one tries to empower you and gives you a community of people who are trying to support that empowerment. I know where my money is at on which one is actually better, Unfortunately, because of some deception amongst 12-step programs, we may not be able to ever demonstrate that it's better, but we can keep going with what works.
But I also tell people, if you go to AA and it works and it helps you be sober for whatever reason, then do it, because it's better. You can try other programs and see what helps the best, but if you find something that works for you, I don't want to tell you stop doing it just because there may be parts of it that aren't rational. So I guess I wanted to give that caveat too.
Yep. All right, we've got Jeff. I don't have a place for Jeff. Jeff in the ether, welcome to the show.
Hi, Matt. I'm from Kalamazoo, Michigan.
All right.
Hey, I am how do I say this? I'm a atheist turned theist, back to atheist again. And this happened over the period of about, I'm 50 now, so there's a lot of time in between. Like my friends think I switch every 5 years, but that's not quite the case. But I wanted to speak to you about some of the reasons why I went from atheist to theist. And the first one was because my father he had hallucinated, and he brought that into our family. And within a week or so of me going to the 8th grade, he went from atheist to full-blown Christians. And I rather did the same thing when in my mid-30s I had some marital situation and stress, because by that time I would have labeled myself angry agnostic. But I too had hallucination about a light.
Do we know why these hallucinations occurred for you or your father?
Yeah, actually, I know both of them. For me, it was because my wife wanted a divorce, and over some of my bad behavior, and I called my father and I said, "Dad, what do I do?" And he's like, "Well, son, break out that Bible and dust it off and look up all the times they say forgiveness." And so I did, and I hand wrote out all the places in the Bible where it talked about forgiveness, and I handed it to my wife, and she said, and she read it, took it, threw it in my face, and said, "God might forgive you, but I'm not gonna." And I literally instantly went into a nervous breakdown.
Okay.
So, but during this nervous breakdown, I saw a light, I heard a voice, I had this overwhelming peace that came over top of me, and then in the morning, I was like, wow, I think I just had a nervous breakdown. But then...
Did somebody diagnose you with this, or was this when you thought, oh, I had a nervous breakdown, that's how you determined you had a nervous breakdown?
That's how I determined it.
Yeah.
I just woke up in the morning.
I'm really skeptical of self-diagnoses, by the way.
I know that, as you should be, but, I was just like...
I'm just wondering why you're not.
It was a watershed moment in my life.
I get that this is important to you and changes, but when I hear about... I'm not trying to be House, if you ever watched the show on Fox, but, your dad had hallucinations, you had hallucinations, which you think were brought on by stress. Have you ever spoken to a doctor about this?
Yeah. Actually, I think, yeah, we literally went, after that, we went into emergency counseling. We managed to salvage our marriage for another 5 or 6 years. But during the whole time back then, I was like I went to the First Baptist church that I could find. We switched churches, really trying to, I read the Bible cover to cover 9 or 10 times. I mean, I obsessed over it. So I'm super familiar with all this doctrine and stuff. And then after my divorce, I spent 4 or 5 years kind of staying away from the church, just doing my own thing, being agnostic. And then I became unemployed. Went back. I wound up going back to church, to a different church, Christian Reformed church, and they sort of accepted me. And I wound up singing in the choir and singing on the praise team. And
I'm wondering what the question is.
well, the question is this: how can you help folks who may have had self-diagnosed hallucinations to understand that that's what it was?
By telling them to go see an expert and get some diagnosis?
Yeah, okay, I understand. You're right. I just wish there was more people that could, because once you get convinced about something, even if it's wrong or right, it's really difficult to go back on yourself.
Well, but you yourself attributed it to having a nervous breakdown. Was that sometime later, or was that at the time? Did you kind of know that Go ahead.
That was right at the time. I almost instantly. It was no doubt. It was like the next day.
So you kind of realized this isn't real. This is something going on in my brain. But it still led you to become a theist.
Sort of. I was like a couple days later. I was like, well, God, if you're really there, show yourself. Otherwise, forget about it. And then
did he show himself?
In a weird, I wouldn't say he showed himself, but it was like a really weird set of circumstances that happened afterwards. There was a Christian guy where I worked that he was noticing that I wasn't acting right. Something was wrong with me. And he asked me if I had ever heard about this group called Promise Keepers in the 90s, where they would fill up all these Christians would fill up stadiums.
Sure. So somebody noticed that you were in pain, because that's the sort of thing that we notice, especially if we work with someone. And this person's ideology was such that their immediate non-expert conclusion was that you were in pain because you needed Jesus, so they then introduced you to Jesus.
Right. So then, like the next day, a woman I worked with, she came up to me and said, "Well, hey, have you ever heard of Promise Keepers?" I went, "Well, yeah."
Oh, so two people mentioned Promise Keepers, and that must be God.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she was like, "Well, if you want to go, I'll pay your way." I was like, "Oh, okay." And then, so I did. I went. I went to the. I called the nearest church and said, "Got tickets to this thing." And then I wound up going, and then there was this flood of emotions, and cried my eyes out all weekend, and came back with this idea that I had to find this God character. So I went on this.
So basically, what you're describing is you were in a vulnerable state. Somebody took you something. They broke you down to the point where you were crying, and then you felt a change.
Right.
Yeah, that's how cults work. And Christianity is just another cult. Cult is the label that big churches put on the little churches. Yes, I know there's another technical definition. In San Jose, I spent the weekend with someone who escaped from a cult, which used to be located here in Austin for a period of time. There's a documentary on Netflix right now called Holy Hell.
We just watched that. That's good.
And some of those folks who were in that cult are still here in Austin, which means we should get them over to perhaps talk about it. But I met Chris, who was one of the people in the documentary. Yeah, what you're describing is it's not the only way that people find their way into religions, but it is a way. So, for a while you didn't believe, and then you believed for a while, and now you don't. So.
Oh, no. Yeah, I'm a total atheist right now.
Cool.
And honestly, Matt, at one point, when I just discovered YouTube, you were like the devil, and I was staying away from you. But and I started listening to your show to see if I could convert atheists, right? And then I started listening to you guys' lines of logic, and I was like, well, and pretty soon, my whole structure of beliefs and such kind of went down the hole. And there's a lot more to it than that, but
well, I thank you for sharing, and I'm glad that you have made it through a religious experience and out the other side as a non-believer. And I won't pretend to have any medical expertise, although if you're having problems like hallucinations ever, go see a doctor, for reals.
Right.
It's not trivial. But yeah, these sorts of things can convince people. You know what else can convince people? Coincidences. Two people told me something. You know what else can convince people? Really bad arguments or appeals to hope and desires or fears. They're all pathways into this. And one of the things that I've talked about before, both in magic and skepticism and atheism, is that if you think you can't be fooled, you're too late. And if, for example, you know how some con artists work, once you think you know the way that this con is done, you'll be able to spot it when it's done that way. But if it's done a different way and you don't understand how that could possibly be the case, what you're likely to do is say, hey, I'm smart. I've been clued in. In wrestling terms, I'm a smart mark, or I'm half smart in the con game. And I know how this can be done, and this wasn't done any of those ways. And because I'm smart, and I know that it wasn't done in one of those ways, it must have been supernatural. It must have been a god. This person must have actual psychic powers. And all you're doing is engaged in self-deception, and the same thing happens with religion. But I'm going to move on to some other callers real quick. Thanks for sharing, Jeff.
Yep. Bye.
Take care. Well, let's see. As a reminder, after the show's over, we go to dinner, and they'll put up the thing in there for Star of India. I don't know, I had a hard time finding the point of what the question was.
Yeah.
It said on here about, hallucinations leading to religion, but...
Yeah, I think he kind of wanted to talk about his story and how he became a theist and got out of it.
And I think that's important, by the way. One of the things, I love Margaret Downey. I think she's one of my favorite people in the entire secular community. And she made a point several years ago that while at conventions it's nice to have academics or people with expertise in a particular area get up and talk about those things, let me tell you, here's some Bible contradictions, here's some fallacies, here's how to argue and all this stuff. The one thing the atheists and secular communities are needing are more people telling stories of, I was here and now I'm here and here's how I got here, so that the people who hear them know they're not the only ones.
Right.
It can't be overlooked.
And the point you made about cults taking advantage of people when they're vulnerable is a really good one. That's why I refuse to support Salvation Army, because I think they do the same thing. They help you, which is great, but they take advantage of your vulnerability and need of help to implant their message, which, their help is contingent on receiving this message. So I think it's all the same.
Yeah, we've talked before about, I'd really love to give the homeless this sandwich, but first let me give you the sermon.
Right.
No, just give them the food. That's it. And that's why groups like Atheists Helping the Homeless here in Austin and elsewhere, that's what they're doing. And recognizing that we're stuck here on this planet, that what affects you probably affects me to some degree, that we have interactions, finding better ways to work. That is the secular humanism that I was arguing for in the recent debate. And it's something that religions cannot touch. And it's the reason why so many religions are desperate to get their hands on young minds, because if you can get these ideas in there from the get-go, they linger. And even if they wander away in their teens and 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s, eventually there's some chance that they'll come back when they're faced with the specter of their own mortality. I'd rather kind of deal with reality, and if it turns out there's an afterlife, either someone can demonstrate that it's real, in which case that's when we should believe it. Otherwise, it's a bonus that you find out after you're dead. Nothing much I can do about it. Do you have a preference on where we go next?
Oh, I haven't looked at the list.
This may be interesting for the two of us. Mick in Cleveland, thanks for waiting.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Hey, Mick.
Yes.
Yep.
Hey. So I've heard a lot of new atheists kind of talk about this, so I wanted to get your guys' perspective on this, on the idea, I guess, of like what kind of the fundamental basis of morality that you would, like, how would you square that with eating meat or not eating meat?
Well, one of us at the table is a vegan.
Not anymore.
One of us at the table was a vegan.
I was a vegan for 10 years.
I will say,
Oh, cool.
I don't find it to be a moral issue. I'm open to being convinced that it is, but I don't have a moral evaluation of it. That the mere consumption of meat is a moral issue is something that I just reject. Now there's a difference. There's a difference, and I'll let you get to this. That doesn't mean that there aren't moral issues surrounding how we go about acquiring that meat. There are plenty of problems with factory farms and other things like that. But if the question is it immoral to eat meat? My answer is no, that there's been no demonstration that this is a moral issue.
Cool. Well, I guess what got me kind of thinking about this was I was watching some videos, and a guy had an argument that, I don't know, it was kind of like the most convincing version that I've kind of run across to date, and that was like if you imagine, you describe, kind of criteria based upon which you could decide whether or not to eat meat, or like to whether or not to do something to an animal. What criteria could you establish that an animal would have that if you also possessed that characteristic would justify, doing to you what meat eaters do to animals, if that makes sense?
It doesn't. You lost me at some point in there, so if you want to reframe it, that's fine. I didn't follow it.
Right. So, like, for instance, if let's say you say, well, I can eat, meat because cows can't talk, let's say, if that was your characteristic, then... Yeah,
that's a stupid foundation for morality or justifying anything. That's nowhere near what my foundations for morality are.
Oh, well, I guess it was just seeing if, I don't know, if it was in some way special pleading to say that, well, simply because it's not human, it can or can't be eaten.
So, first of all, I would say if you ate your neighbor's pet cat, that's an immoral action. But merely eating the meat is not a moral action. And the reason that, that's your neighbor's cat that they love and there's an investment in and blah, blah, blah. The thing is, there's two different issues. There's moral obligations, and then there's moral virtues. And the one way I've described this before is, if there's a child standing out in the street, you are not necessarily morally obligated to put yourself at risk to rescue that child, but you would always be morally virtuous to do so. Whether or not you're morally obligated depends on a number of other factors. If there's no real risk to you, if you are in the position where you are in a custodial relationship with that child, then you may be at a greater responsibility. Like I'm not morally obligated to donate a kidney to anybody, but it would be morally virtuous for me to do so. And we hold people responsible for their moral obligations in proportion to their ability to understand those obligations. And yes, it's speciesist. We extend this to human species, even those of us who could not understand. So there's no denying that there's nothing speciesist about this. But the reason we do that is because they're part of the human community and they have, you're not just affecting that individual. So I don't see, there needs to be, morality is about interactions between thinking beings. And if there's not an equity in the ability to comprehend and understand and express moral views, then there's not a parity of moral responsibility. Like I'm more morally responsible than a toddler because they don't yet understand it. But humans are more morally responsible than ants. Based on what we know about how minds work, the very idea that an ant has any concept of morality is bizarre. Could be the case, but that would need to be demonstrated. And so when we talk about, is it moral to eat meat? Well, you could say it's morally virtuous to not eat meat. And I maybe buy that because I'm okay with saying that doing more good or being morally virtuous might apply broadly outside of just our species and what we do and what we eat and how we eat it. There may be some moral obligation questions in there as to how we attain what we eat. But when the position is you have a moral obligation not to eat meat, there's a burden of proof there that needs to be demonstrated. And I don't find any sufficient. I've come under attacks from ethical vegans in the past, and I will again right after the show airs, I'm sure. But I don't find any argument for a moral obligation there.
Well, it seems, I don't know, you can correct me, I guess, if I'm wrong, but it seems like the examples that you gave of, like, you know, let's say you have the child in the street and you can choose to save them or not. It seems as though in that case it was an inaction that may or may not be viewed favorably, whereas it seems to me like eating meat is an action. So,
sure. So why do you draw a distinction between an inaction and an action?
I don't know. I guess that's a good question. It just seems that's the way, I guess, fundamentally that.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I agree that one is an inaction and one is an action, and I agree that there's a difference between the two, which is why we have two different labels for them. But on the grounds of moral obligation, there need to be some justification for why you consider them different in evaluation, and then all I'd have to do is come up with another, example of an action related to moral obligation. My big thing is, equality and how you hold different individuals and agents responsible. And so, is a shark immoral for eating me?
Well, I mean, I guess it's just, I was thinking about it more in the other sense, because in that sense, it seems like that would in a way seem to contradict your point, because then it would, if you have a greater understanding of morality, then like it would seem as though then it would be more important to investigate this.
Yes,
I
it
guess.
would be, and I have. So because I have a better understanding of morality than a shark, I also understand that my interactions are based on how well we each understand those. Do I have the same moral obligation to John that I do to sharks and ants and flowers?
Well, I would say I'm sort of in the camp of Sam Harris on this, which is that, we care about John more than we would care about, let's say, a dog, and we care about a dog more than an ant, more than a flower, et cetera, because we, I guess, would recognize that John's capacity to, his sense of self-identity and his understanding that, of his own suffering would be greater than, let's say, an animal's lack.
And see, my morality isn't based on any simple notion of harm or suffering.
Okay.
So this is what you get from, Peter Singer and a number of others, that, harm is some foundational principle that should be avoided. My views on morality, which you can do a search for the superiority of secular morality and a few other talks that I've given, because the foundation is not in any way based on simple harm or suffering, for me, and that's not what I would advocate.
Okay.
But John's been quiet, and
well, there's different motivations too. There's even different moral arguments. I was a vegan for 10 years, and I didn't really consider myself an ethical vegan. I was doing it for health reasons. I thought it would be a healthier diet for me, and I had to supplement B12 and do some other things because, there's some caveats there. But, by the same token, and Matt mentioned this, the factory farming, the way animals are slaughtered. If I understand correctly, you consider those kinds of things perhaps moral issues, but
Yes.
not just the mere fact that you're eating meat that came from an animal.
yes.
And so I was aware of how animals are treated in providing meat for people to eat and felt bad about that, but that wasn't my primary motivation. It was just kind of a secondary thing for me. But, people can also make a moral argument that it's bad for the planet. It takes a lot of water, wastes a lot of water. We grow a lot of grain to to feed animals that could feed people, and so there's different kinds of moral arguments, I guess, besides just the the cruelty aspect or the animals suffer.
And for the record, I think those are good moral arguments as well.
So yeah, it gets complicated really quickly, and then some people make a distinction if you kill your own meat and only use what you kill, that's a kind of a different level of morality than just supporting industries that maybe are cruel to animals and those sorts of things. So it gets complicated very quickly, and I guess there's lots of layers to the onion as far as that goes.
Yeah. I mean, obviously there are different, I guess, grades. Obviously we can agree that the sort of factory farming business, and by the way, I'm not an ethical vegan either, but it was just something that kind of crossed my mind, and I just kind of wanted to get your take on it.
Yeah, one of the questions that I've repeatedly asked ethical vegans is, have you ever walked behind a plow and a combine that's harvesting and planting the vegetables you eat and looked at the carnage, the destruction to rats and mice and other animals, and then how that affects the broader ecosystem? There is no solution that allows us to survive without the destruction of something else that's alive. This gets to an interesting facet with regard to religion, of what kind of God creates a system where, in order for his preferred beings to survive, they must kill and destroy other living things. There's no way around this. And until we're able to get, we're to Star Trek levels of technology where we can synthesize food, and then that may not, depending on how the replicators are powered and what material they're using to conform, that still might not solve the problem. It may be unavoidable that to live you must kill. And I think
right at the beginning of Genesis, that's the curse that man has to toil.
Yeah, because before that, the animals with the big fang teeth for eating meat, they just ate plants. I mean, even then, you're still killing living things. So there's an oversimplification that happens when we start talking about living things, and I think that the entirety of the situation is far more complex than anybody really grasps. And as long as we're still having simple little arguments about whether or not it's moral for two people who love each other to be able to get married, no matter what gender they're associated with, I don't know how we can get to the bigger issues. And while I don't find a sound moral argument that provides a moral obligation for me to never eat meat, I do find morally virtuous arguments that might go that way, and I find moral obligations with respect to the other broader issues of how we get there and all this. But I don't think there's an easy answer.
Well, and there's even the issue of laboratory grown meat. And even that isn't clear cut. A lot of vegans say, well, if you could grow meat in a laboratory, I would eat it because you're not killing an animal. I've heard some vegans say, I still wouldn't eat it. I still have an ethical objection because you're harvesting cells from animals without their consent. I've heard that.
I think it's clear cut if you have a really good sharp knife.
That too.
Yeah, I do. Although I do want to address that carnage argument. I think that if you actually look at the math, you end up actually causing a lot more destruction in harvesting, the extra food that you need in order to feed the animal in order to eat.
Yeah, I don't deny that. I don't deny that it's diminished. But
right.
If the argument is about causing harm, then you don't just get rid of factory farmed meat. You get rid of factory farmed food, and everybody has their own little garden that they operate without pesticides, that they hand address, and they go to great lengths to make sure that they're not killing anything, and then they only eat what comes out of there. And then you'll have the argument from the pro-plant people, but
Well, and then there's this.
Yeah, I think that seems to me to be kind of an argument of well, I don't smoke, and then somebody might say, well, that means what happens if you're around a smoker, you happen to inhale some smoke, or you're in, and it's well, I'm not, even though I might get, whiffs of smoke or something if I'm near a smoker, or, I'm standing on the sidewalk and cars are driving by, that's still orders of magnitude, difference. I guess so so quantitatively different as to be qualitatively different. But
Perhaps.
anyway, so you would say then that, I guess, suffering is not at all a concern for moral virtues?
No, that's
or
not what I said.
Moral obligations?
No, I'm not. So that phrasing makes it sound like suffering is irrelevant. That's not my case. My foundation for morality are the facts about reality with respect to human flourishing. Suffering is an aspect of it. Harm is an aspect of it. But for the people who reduce it down to simple matters of harm, must reduce harm, that I reject, and I don't know that how you can found a reasonable, positive moral system based just on let's reduce harm. It's an oversimplification.
But on flourishing, on human flourishing, you said, or like I don't know.
Well-being, basically, human well-being, or actually the well-being of thinking creatures is what kind of Sam Harris was going with in the moral landscape. But I draw lines in between species with regard to moral responsibility that I talked about earlier. But you can find most of that online, and if not, you can always email, which is a good time to point out. You can email tv@atheist-community.org. We get tons of email, more than we can possibly answer, but on occasion, somebody involved in the show will do their best to try and give an answer. In some cases, I don't know that I can expound any better on the answer that we've given you today, other than to say that it's complicated and I'm unconvinced of any moral obligation, even to merely not eat meat. But I am convinced of moral obligations with respect to other facets of the question, and certainly moral virtues across the board.
Yeah. Oh, and also, so before I get off, shout out to that, I know that you saw this on Facebook, but the one minister who did a Q&A during the Matt Slick, and he said, "You won't believe what this atheist admits," and fast-forwarded through your answer once he asked you the question.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That was Eric Hernandez, and he and I spoke privately about it, except that I didn't have time to carry on a long conversation because I was traveling to San Jose. But it's funny to me. The question, you guys can see it on the video, basically it was, how do you escape this viciously circular loop that it is your mind that is telling you can trust your mind? You know, what is the foundation that allows you to escape this and appeal to reality? You can't. I have no solution to that problem. I'm not aware that anybody else has a solution to the problem. And the theists who claim they have a solution to that problem never actually demonstrate it. You want to know why? Because they can't. It's still their brain that's telling them they have you can't escape that. Oh, I have a solution to the problem and it's God. Really? That's your brain saying that. All those times that Matt Slick says, oh, that's just your brain fizzing. That was just his brain fizzing. It's about, the objection is your worldview can't offer a solution to this. And my worldview can. No, your worldview can't. You can't escape this. You can claim that you've escaped it. You can convince yourself that you've escaped it, but that's just your brain fizzing. But on that note, I'm going to move on to another caller because not everybody's seen that debate or would want to.
All right, you guys take it easy.
Thanks
for taking my call.
All right, we've got OC in Houston.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello?
You're on the air.
We hear you. We hear you.
Okay. I wanted to touch on the topic of evolution. I don't know if you guys are allowed to go into that too deeply.
No, we're not allowed to talk about that.
Oh, okay.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. We're allowed to talk about whatever we want. It's just that the issue of evolution isn't particularly relevant to whether or not there's a God.
I see.
But you're welcome to talk about it if you like.
Well, tell you the truth, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to talk about. But could I pitch into the topic as to why we're allowed to start eating meat? Was that the last topic you guys were talking about?
I rather not. I think we've covered it in as much detail as we need to today. And you're a theist, right?
Yes.
So isn't your reason that we're allowed to eat meat because God says it's okay?
I was going to say that it's because we were given dominion over the planet.
And
we messed up.
Yeah, so God says it's okay. Yeah, sorry, but having a discussion about the morality of something when you're basing it on reality is difficult enough. when you bring in things that aren't necessarily real and appeals to Scripture. There's a reason why courtrooms don't allow spectral evidence anymore. There's a reason why scientific inquiry doesn't allow appeals to the supernatural, and it also doesn't allow appeals to your religious book. So saying that we were put here with dominion over the animals doesn't do anything at all to help us reach a reasonable conclusion about that. So instead, why don't you talk about evolution or whatever else it was you wanted to talk about?
Okay, I'll go ahead and say that I don't believe there's any sound evidence that evolution is real in the sense that a microbe can transmute into a adult human being.
So you deny that time is real?
I believe that time is real.
How old is the universe?
In my opinion, I'm not like the conventional theists who would say it's about 6,000 years old. I'd say it's much older than that.
How much?
But human history is probably, I'd say it's in the millions. But human history, as far as human age, I'd say that's in the realm of about 6,000 years.
What difference does human history have to do with it? You know, evolution applies to all life, not just humans, right? And by the way, if you think that life's been around for millions and human life's only been around for hundreds of thousands, aren't you talking about acknowledging that there's this huge time span, and then you're just saying, oh, that couldn't have prompted enough change in that amount of time to result in humans?
Oh no, I'm saying that that humans were created by, that everything was created. But
okay, now we're not talking about evolution. Now you're just making an assertion about creation. I thought when you were talking about evolution, you were denying the micro-macro distinction, which, by the way, I'm fine with, except that what your position is that little changes can't ever add up to big changes.
Yeah, that is true. I don't think there's any evidence for the little changes increasing and causing an increase in complexity.
What does increase in complexity have to do with it?
Well, in order to go from a microbe into a human being, you would have to, the cells have to become a lot more complex. It has to be added.
Do they?
Well, yeah.
Because, which has more genes, a human being or a tomato?
I'd say I'm not too sure about that.
Yeah.
I know the human genes.
But
genes are a lot more complicated because
they are, huh?
Well, I'd say.
Do you have any expertise in the study of evolution?
A little bit. I was a minor in biology, but that was a long time ago.
Okay. So when you were taught what science has to say about evolution, did you just say, nope, this isn't real? Or did you have some reason? Because this is not an issue about religion. There are plenty of theists and Christians, and even the Catholic Church is on board with evolution. And one of the more outspoken defenders at the Dover trial was a Catholic. The head of the Human Genome Project, who is an evangelical Christian, has said that based on the DNA evidence alone, you can confirm common ancestry, that evolution is essentially undeniable, and we know enough about what's happened that we were able to make predictions and go out and find transitional forms in the correct fossil layers. And what you seem to be saying is that just can't happen. And I'm wondering, where's your Nobel Prize?
Well, I believe evolution happens, but I believe that there's a little bit of confusion as to the terms.
I guarantee you we're in agreement there.
Yeah, because...
Do you know what the definition of evolution is?
I'm sorry?
You know what the definition of evolution is? Like change in allele frequency over time?
Yes.
Okay. So
yes, I believe that happens, but that only causes a change in. Basically, it only causes certain traits to become more magnified, to occur more frequently within a population. But there is a limit to what.
So it can't decrease traits in a population? It can only cause them to increase? If it can only cause them to increase, if it can only cause them to increase, aren't we moving towards more complexity? I mean, isn't everything you say kind of just refuting itself? It can't increase complexity, but it can increase. What?
No, it causes like traits that are already there, basically. It's not going to cause a trait to basically pop up from a really complex trait, a really complex series of traits that pop up from nothing, from nowhere.
Oh, so
Yeah.
if we had, let's say, two people and they were both brunettes, we can't ever get to blondes?
Yes, you can. That one's going to occur by mutation.
Yeah.
But, for instance, those two people are going to remain people by the definition of what a person is.
Sure. So I agree that that's still people.
Yeah.
Now,
but for instance, they're not going to transmute into something that can't already be defined as a person.
No. See, that's the thing. Evolution doesn't say that somebody has offsprings that are of another species.
Right.
Offsprings
Right, exactly.
are always.
It says
Offsprings are the same
they do,
species.
but over a very long time is what evolution says.
Yes.
What I'm saying is that there's a limit. Like no matter how much.
How do you know there? How do you know there's a limit?
Because all the experiments that I'm aware of.
Okay, go get aware of more experiments. You don't get to just argue. You don't get to, when I say, how do you know that there's a limit? And you just say, well, based on what I've seen, there must be a limit. That's not the way science is done.
I haven't seen any experiments that demonstrate there isn't a limit, is what I'm saying.
So when I tell you that you don't get to reference what experiments you haven't seen, your response is to reference experiments you haven't seen.
Oh, no, not exactly. But like for instance, like
yes, exactly. Rewind. Listen to that last minute. That's exactly what happened.
Well, maybe so. Well.
So let me ask you. Let me ask you this because let me ask you this because we're probably going to move on to another caller. If you are convinced that speciation and large changes can't occur over time, why are you calling an atheist podcast show instead of actual scientists?
I was afraid of that. I was afraid that was something you might not want to touch on for very long, in depth. Like, I don't know. Like I've never called the Atheist Experience before, but that was just. I couldn't think of anything else. That was just the first thing that came to mind. Like, but I'll touch on that. Sure.
So go out and do the homework, then talk to scientists, and when you demonstrate that evolution can't do what it's already been demonstrated capable of doing, you'll get a Nobel Prize, and then we'll have you on as a guest. And this is where the world learned that evolution can't really do what we already know evolution can do.
Sure, but like for instance, the best one of the best examples they like to talk about when they're trying to prove that the limitations, that there are no limitations. They like talking about fruit flies a lot, but most of the fruit flies that they use, the examples they use, they don't, like their mutations don't have any function. Like it's not gonna produce a species that's gonna.
Did you just say most of them don't have any function? What about the ones that do?
I said most of them.
Yeah, most of them. So
that's because
most is not an argument for not possible. You would have to say none of them, and you instead said most, which lets me know that you're aware that you're not correct.
I was just being diplomatic, sort of. But for instance, they like talking about the fruit flies and how.
Did I bring up fruit flies? Have you bothered to read Evolutionary Biologist? Is fruit flies all they reference?
Almost all of them like bringing up the example of fruit flies.
Yeah, you know what other examples they bring up? Are humans and the other great apes related?
Functionally, they're similar. I'd say they're similar.
Did modern apes and modern humans evolve from a common ancestor?
I don't believe they did. I believe they're similar for a reason.
Yeah, the fusing of chromosome 2 is the reason. Have you bothered to look up the fusing of chromosome 2?
I'm not too familiar with that one.
That's the problem. You haven't actually looked in. I mean, this is easy. Go to talkorigins.org. Actually read like Jerry Coyne's book on why evolution is true. And instead of just going, oh, they're only talking about fruit flies, try and actually get to the concepts and the data. I mean, even this is what I was mentioning. Francis Collins, who's an evangelical Christian who believes in Jesus because of a frozen waterfall, is the former head of the Human Genome Project, who recognizes that humans and modern apes have a common ancestor. And this isn't a problem for his religion. He's a good scientist. He actually knows and understands and has studied this thing. It's not just like, oh, I got a minor in it some time ago and thought it was all BS. and then I haven't seen any experiments that prove me wrong. Maybe that's because you're not looking.
Well, the thing is, I believe that based on the evidence, based on what we see, seeing that there is a common answer is one interpretation, but there's just as much evidence to say that there's a common design.
That's a lie. You don't get to say there's just as much evidence while you just spent 15 minutes talking about all the things that you're not familiar with. And by the way, if you're right, you can demonstrate this, and you'll get the Nobel Prize, you'll change the foundations of science, and in the end, you still won't have done one damn thing to demonstrate that creationism is true. Because you can poke holes in scientific theories all day long, but if you have an alternate theory, you have to present positive evidence for that, not just poke holes in something else. And if all you're going to do is poke holes in something that you acknowledge that you don't understand and don't have enough expertise for, why are we talking to you? And why did you call an atheist podcast with two non-scientists, non-biologists, to talk about this? This is the thing. I understand why these ideas are compelling and convincing to people, because they've been taught a religious model, and then they get to learn a little bit more about reality. And they cannot give up the religious model, so now we've got to find a way to mash these two things together. Sometimes mashups are fun. Science and religion mashups, not fun, because all they do is dilute truth. Every single religious claim about facts of reality that can be confirmed as true was confirmed by scientific investigation and not religious assertion. Every religious claim about facts about reality that was debunked by scientific investigation and not religious assertions. The same is true for science. The only thing that fixes science is more science. When has religion ever shown science to be wrong? Never. It's not a path to truth. It's not a path to understanding. And when you try to mash up fantasy and reality, you can get good TV shows, but you don't get good science.
Well, and it's really disingenuous to say, well, there's been no experiments that have shown these kinds of changes over periods of time. This is something that took hundreds of millions of years. Nobody has run an experiment that lasted hundreds of millions of years, because humans have a, 70, 80-year lifespan. It takes a long time per generation. That's why they do experiments on fruit flies, because they don't live very long. It's not because fruit flies are different and mutations are different with fruit flies. It's just, it's easier to study.
Yeah, the nice thing, though, is that the power of any scientific model is in the predictions that it makes. And in the case of the theory of evolution by natural selection, by the way, evolution is a fact. The change in allele frequencies over time, speciation, these things are observed facts. It is the theory of evolution by means of natural selection that is the theory to explain the observations. That model makes predictions that allowed us to go out and dig and find Tiktaalik. Boom. That model makes predictions that says, you know what? If in fact human beings and other modern apes had a common ancestor, we should be able to find evidence for that. And then when we go and look at chromosome 2 and we see the fusing of the chromosome, boom. I don't know why I'm doing like ESPN things, because I don't ever watch ESPN. But if you're going to call in and just say, oh, well, I haven't seen evidence for evolution, then go out and look. Don't call an atheist show. Go out and study. I'm not the guy to talk to about this. I could probably get somebody who's an expert in this to explain it to you, but it's not the expert's job to go out and have one-on-one conversations with everybody if they've already published detailed tomes and been teaching students for decades. We're not here to do your homework for you. I will, on occasion, point you to like talkorigins.org or something along those lines. Let's see, we got 15 minutes left, and then we'll be going to Star of India, and they'll put the address up there again. We've got like 4 more on morality.
Oh, wow.
But here's one from an atheist in Fort Lauderdale. Paul, thanks for waiting. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Matt and John. How you guys doing?
Good. How are you doing?
Good.
Fine, thanks. So I was kind of wanting to talk about whenever someone asked you what you would accept as proof, and I think I have a scenario of what I would accept, or at least what I tell Christians, because it's kind of unsatisfying just to say that God would know. But anyway, it's kind of like
I'll disagree from the outset, but go ahead.
All right. Well, in the Bible, when it talks about the 450 priests of Baal and the story of Elisha, and he basically, they have a contest, they have an experiment right there for God, and they light a fire through prayer alone. Now, if you can do that like consistently, and okay, maybe it's not proof, but it's a starting place. From there, if you can consistently light a fire through prayer alone.
How do you know it's through prayer? If we're sitting in a room and I say I'm going to pray and a fire is going to start right there, and a fire does start, how did you confirm that my prayer had anything to do with it?
Well, I don't know. I suppose that just because you pray and there's, you'd have to obviously do this a bunch of times and make sure that.
Sure. What if I can? What if I can do it every single time? I say I'm going to pray, and a fire is going to appear right there on the floor in front of us, and I can do it over and over again. How do you confirm that it's because I'm praying?
I guess because you prayed and then the fire started.
That's a fallacy. After this, therefore,
Okay.
because of this, you get that just because one
true.
thing happens and then something else happens doesn't mean the two were necessarily connected, right?
Well, that's true. That's a good point.
What if I've secretly hidden something underneath this carpet that you're unaware of, a technology that you can't even find when you examine, but I've got a technology underneath there that will start a fire whenever I tap my big toe. So I just say, okay, I'm going to pray, and I tap my big toe, and there's a fire. If your conclusion is that I'm actually causing it through prayer, you are factually incorrect. So wouldn't that demonstrate that's a really bad method for validating prayer?
Well, how is a scientific experiment even done then?
Well, see, here we are. If you don't know how a scientific experiment is done, maybe you should stop thinking that you have a good enough understanding to determine which thing is causal to another. It's better to go out and understand how we go about structuring experiments in order to make those connections, in order to remove bias. I'm somebody I've been doing magic since I was 3. I could do a magic trick that would be good enough to start a religion with once upon a time.
Sure.
Sure.
But wouldn't that be an example of the shenanigans? As I said, it'd have to be consistent. It would have to be reproducible.
I can consistently do a magic trick. That doesn't mean I have dark forces running through me. Just because you don't know how I did it doesn't mean, as a matter of fact, when the case is that you do not know how this was accomplished, if you then assert that you do know, that is the error. This is how psychics and con artists and magicians have been fooling people forever. It's playing on our need to know how it was done, and when we can't find any other explanation, it's magic. You can't confirm magic.
Well, I must say that's a good point. And by the way, I'm a big fan of seen all your debates. Just wanted to throw that in there. But I guess I'll let you get on to other callers, and I'll think about that stuff. And thanks very much for the talk.
Okay. I don't know, John, what would convince you, since that was the initial point?
Well, it's it's a good point that really what would convince you, if anything, could be something you just don't understand that's a natural cause. It's almost like, you can do like James Randi does and set up the experiment in such a way to remove the possibility of trickery, but you can't really universally cover everything.
Yep.
So you're kind of left with, I don't know what would convince me. My first suspicion would always be trickery, because I don't know of anything supernatural in this world. So that's what I would assume until I could gather more evidence. But I don't know.
Now, there are some things that based on what we know about reality. There are, like epistemic impossibilities. This is a reason why there's a website called Why Won't God Heal Amputees? If we had a bunch of people come in and they'll examine me. I don't want to put John through the torment, but we have a bunch of doctors come in and we're filming this and we are taking vitals and everything else. And they cut off my arm and set it on the table in front of us. And then somebody, I don't know, sacrifices a chicken, since we're all about killing animals today. And my arm regrows in front of you. Now that would be phenomenal. And yet I still wouldn't be able to say the best explanation for why this happened is that there's a God that did this. Because we're barred from being able to investigate and confirm the existence of the supernatural or its ability to interact. At most, I could say, I have no explanation for how that happened. And this is the reason why Arthur C. Clarke said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And then Michio Kaku took it and said any advanced technology is indistinguishable from divinity, which came up in the discussion on Thursday. And so that's why I give the answer that I give. I have no idea what would convince me. As a matter of fact, it'd be monumentally arrogant of me to think that I can tell the difference between an extremely advanced technology that I don't understand and something supernatural that I don't understand. As long as they're both in the category of I don't understand it, I don't have any way to distinguish between those two things. Right. But if in fact there is a God, then under most definitions of what we would call a God, that God should know exactly what it would take to convince me, should be able to do it. And so now it's not my problem. It's God's problem. What kind of God creates people, sticks them in a world, gives them brains, where we discover the methods by which we can have the most reliable, consistent, probabilistic understanding of the reality that we find ourselves in. And then for the single most important question, bars that entire question, the entire subject of that question, from any sort of reasonable inquiry at all, making it impervious to the best methods for understanding truth, and then saying, if you get the answer to this question wrong, you're doomed. That's like, how many fingers have I got up behind my back? If you get it wrong, I'm going to torture you.
Forever.
What kind of God does something like that? If you're actually wise and decent, you have to both recognize the problem and offer a solution to it. It is fundamentally immoral to punish people for getting wrong answers to questions they had no capability of assessing. But
I think the amputee thing is more saying if prayer works, because people say prayer works, why doesn't God heal amputees? Yep. And then, the answer could be, well, God just doesn't answer those kinds of prayers. So it's not falsifiable, and then you're left with it's still a useless conclusion because you can say that about any prayer that's unanswered. So, there's no point in even making that inquiry in that case.
Yeah.
But you do show that if God answers all prayers, that's obviously.
Well, sometimes the answer is no. I would say that this year in particular, without doing anything to speak towards an individual candidate at all, this year is an example. There's no benevolent God associated with the Bible, because the Bible has this idea that God appoints your leaders, that all leaders are appointed by God, that God has a plan. Holy crap. If this is God's plan, the current state of politics in the United States of America, what a douche. No way around this. All right, so let's try Gerrard in Wisconsin. Thanks for waiting. We got just a few minutes left, but I wanted to maybe try and take a stab at your question. Welcome to the show.
Real quick. I look forward to seeing you guys, you, in Memphis, Milwaukee.
Oh, yeah, on the 20th.
I'll be seeing you there.
Or 21st.
The 20th? Yeah, I would say that's 21st. Did you say at the beginning of the show the 20th?
I think I fly out on the 20th, and the convention's the 21st and 22nd.
All right, well, great. Well, I look forward to seeing you there. Will I have any time to talk to you then?
I don't know. One of the things with that weekend is that I'm showing up, and I'll be there during the day for the first day of the convention, moderating the debate that evening, but I fly out the very next morning to go to another convention in Kansas. So I can't promise that there's time, but if you see me, come up and say, hey.
All right, I will do. Well, I can talk to you then. I was just gonna run a question by you about objective morality. You're not a dualist, correct?
Correct.
Okay. What's your definition of dualism? Real quick.
So generally, if we're talking about like substance dualism, the fact that there is a mind or soul that is separate from the physical, and yet they somehow interact.
Okay. Well, basically, for objective morality, and is it a product of the mind? Is it a product of the brain?
What's the difference?
Okay.
I would say that the mind is what the brain does. That the brain is the physical object that creates the thing, the interactions that we bundle together and identify as a mind.
But the independence of individuals, how is it collectively objective if we have independent individuals with different brains and different minds?
So when you're asking about objective morality, I think we can set aside all the issues of dualism entirely and get to the foundational question. When I talk about objective morality, I'm talking about the ability to make objective assessments with respect to values. I'm not saying that deciding on a particular value is objective. When I talk about morality, it's founded on well-being, on human flourishing. And if somebody says, well, why should morality be about that? Then my answer is, I don't know or care, but that's what I'm talking about. That's what I mean when I'm talking about morality. And if by morality you mean something else, then we're talking about two different things. If by morality you mean whatever is consistent with the mind of God, then I'm not talking about that, nor do I care about it. I'm talking about well-being and human flourishing, and that is derived from the physical facts of reality that dictate what is or isn't good for us.
But I guess maybe I'm not following as far as what makes that moral, what makes that good.
Nothing about it makes it moral unless you acknowledge that this is what I'm talking about when I talk about moral.
Okay.
What you're doing is the same thing. I just had a conversation with an email.
Right.
You have this idea in your head of morality, and it must be this. And religions have polluted that definition, so now it's prescriptivist, that morality can only be this. And what I'm saying is, what most people have cared about with regard to morality for most of human history is human well-being and flourishing. That's what we're talking about. Ask me a moral question that does not address human flourishing and well-being. And I've never heard one, but if in the end of the day that were the case, I'm still talking about human well-being and flourishing. I am of the opinion that this is what morality is when we're discussing it. And if you're not, that's fine. Please explain how I'm wrong about well-being and human flourishing, because that's the part that's objective.
Good answer. I appreciate that. Like you did state your opinion. So, I mean, I really want to get inside your mind. If I could,
I don't think you can do that.
You in Milwaukee? No, I probably can't. And
I don't think anybody can.
I don't want to be irrational. I want to know truth.
Well,
I listen to you, Aaron Ross, Seth Andrews, David Smalley. I really listened. I really get into you guys, and I'm trying to get a handle on this.
So the best thing to do to start with is just email tv@atheist-community.org with some formulation of, as simply as possible, what question you're looking for. Because the biggest concern when I start talking about morality is, oh, well, why should we care about well-being or human flourishing? What makes that the objective standard? Nobody's saying it is. I'm saying if, in fact, you are concerned with well-being and flourishing, that you can reach objective conclusions about the consequences of actions with respect to that standard. And if your only concern is, why should that be the standard? Then I can say, well, it seems to be what we care about. And if you don't,
better?
What's that?
Yeah, do I have a better alternative?
What else could morality be about other than well-being and flourishing? If the answer is, which I get from theists, that morality is about what God thinks or what God wants, then fine, we're talking about two different things. But I'm not going to give up the word morality just because somebody says they have an esoteric definition that's trying to lay claim to it, when I think the facts of reality also show that throughout the entire course of human history, when we talk about what is or isn't moral, we are talking about what is in our best interest with regard to interactions with others.
So articulate. I appreciate you.
Thanks. I'll see you at the convention.
See you then. Have a good day, John. Sorry I didn't get to talk to you.
No problem.
Yeah. There's only one caller left, and we've hit the limit, and it's Hector in LA, and you're calling in to talk about the subject of morality, or the subjectivity of morality. Did you hear my last answer?
Yeah, I did.
Did it answer your question?
Sort of, but like, if they're not all absolutes and like everything's subjective, how do you condemn other people's moralities and the morality of God in the Old Testament?
So now you've introduced a new term, moral absolutes.
Right.
Which is completely separate from objectivity and subjectivity. You're talking about moral absolutes. Something is always wrong in all circumstances at all times.
Right.
What is that?
Well, in a certain situation, like it's always going to be absolutely wrong in that situation. Like murder itself, there might be different situations. Murder might not always be wrong.
Well, no. Murder is a legal definition. Murder is a moral definition. So I mean, you have to be a little. But what you're saying is, there may be situations in which killing someone may not necessarily be immoral, right?
Right.
Right. So all of my ethics and morality are situational. I don't think that there's one absolute answer to every possible scenario, because there's no reason to think that's the case. What we can say is that for almost any scenario you're going to engage in, this is going to be wrong. And if your concern is, oh my gosh, if we can't come up with an objective standard, then there's no absolute, while you simultaneously acknowledge that there doesn't need to be an absolute, where's the problem? The lack of absolute certainty or an absolute standard doesn't prevent us from answering questions. I do a lot of woodworking. I talked about this the other night in the debate. It'd be nice if, sometimes you want to measure something and get it exactly and cut several of something. But you don't have to have a ruler, and you don't have to know that your ruler is accurate, because I can build something that is level and square and perfectly fits the area that I'm putting in it without ever taking a single measurement, because I can compare things relatively. I can cut all four of the legs at the same time and know that those legs are the same height. I don't have to know how long they are. And if I go in and I look and I eyeball and say, I want the seat to be about this high, and so I cut my legs a little longer, pull the stool in, figure out roughly how much to cut off, I can make a stool that is the exact right height for me and the place I'm putting it without ever doing a single measurement that appeals to some sort of absolute measure. If we can do that, that's all we need.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks for tuning in. We've got to run. Show's over. Thanks to John. Thanks to all the people who hung out in the studio. We will be back again next week with special guest Ed Brayton, who will be in town to do a lecture. You can visit atheist-community.org for more information about that lecture and the show coming up. You can find other information at atheist-experience.org or .com. And you can email tv@atheist-community.org. Thanks to everybody in the booth whose names are about to appear up on your screen for doing the hard work so that we could sit out here and talk. We'll see you next week.
Happy birthday, John Lennon.
Hi, this is Russell Glasser, host of The Atheist Experience. You know, The Atheist Experience is made possible by volunteers and the generous support of viewers like you. If the promotion of positive atheist culture and separation of church and state are values that you hold, please consider contributing by becoming an ACA member or visiting our product page at evolvefish.com under the Partner tab. Thank you.